There is an animal whose building work can be seen from orbit. In 2007, an ecologist studying melting permafrost on satellite imagery noticed a line in northern Alberta that should not have been there. It turned out to be a dam, 850 meters of it, more than twice the length of the Hoover Dam, holding back a lake of 17 acres, built by generations of animals that stand about knee-high. Same animal. In the 17th century, church authorities in North America decided it counted as a fish, so it could legally be eaten during Lent. Same animal. In August 1948, the state of Idaho loaded 76 of them into wooden crates, flew them over the mountains in a Beechcraft, and dropped them out on surplus wartime parachutes. 75 landed alive and got straight to work. Same animal. A secretion from a pouch under its tail was used for a century to flavor food, and still turns up on ingredient lists under two harmless words. Same animal. By around 1900, hunting had reduced the European species to roughly 1,200 individuals, scattered in 8 isolated pockets from France to Mongolia. Today there are over 1.5 million. And same animal again. Several governments now pay money to release it deliberately into rivers, as flood defense. That is a rodent. A large, slow, short-sighted rodent that eats bark and cannot run away from anything. So, 100 facts about the beaver. What it actually is, the equipment it carries, how the building works and the strange thing that switches it on. The family life. What a colony does to an entire landscape. How we very nearly wiped it out, and why it is now being hired back. This channel takes animals apart properly, with the studies named. Subscribe and let's go. One thing before the list. Something very specific makes a beaver start building, and it is not the sight of water.
I will come back to it, because once you know it, everything else about this animal falls into place. Fact 1. The beaver is the second largest rodent alive on Earth, beaten only by the capybara. A typical adult weighs between 16 and 30 kilograms. That is a medium dog with a flat tail. Fact 2. Big ones get much bigger. Individuals over 40 kilograms have been recorded, which puts them in the weight class of a 10-year-old child. Fact 3. There are exactly 2 species. The North American beaver and the Eurasian beaver. They look nearly identical and behave nearly identically. Fact 4. They cannot interbreed. The North American species carries 40 chromosomes, the Eurasian one carries 48. Attempts to cross them have produced nothing. 2 animals this similar are, genetically, a long way apart. Fact 5. There used to be a much bigger one.
Castoroides, the giant beaver, lived across North America until around 10,000 years ago and reached the size of a black bear. Fact 6. And it built nothing. Its teeth were the wrong shape for felling timber, and there is no evidence it made dams or lodges. The engineering came from the small one. Fact 7. A beaver's front teeth are orange, not stained, pigmented. The enamel contains iron compounds, which harden it and give it the color. Fact 8. That iron is why the teeth work. The hard enamel sits only on the front face. Behind it is softer dentine, which wears away faster, so the edge is constantly worn into a chisel. The tooth sharpens itself every time the beaver uses it. Fact 9. Those teeth never stop growing. A beaver that stopped gnawing would eventually be unable to close its mouth. Fact 10. A beaver can drop a tree the thickness of your arm in a single night. Individuals have been recorded felling trees over a meter across, though most of what they cut is far smaller. Fact 11. They cannot aim. The idea that a beaver drops a tree exactly where it wants it is folklore. The tree falls wherever the lean and the wind take it, and beavers are sometimes crushed by their own work. Fact 12. In the wild, a beaver usually lives 10 to 12 years. In captivity, past 20. That is long enough for one animal to see the same dam through a dozen winters and keep repairing it. Now the body, because almost every part of it is a purpose-built tool. Fact 13. A beaver can close its nose and its ears. Both have valves that seal on contact with water. Fact 14. It has a third eyelid. A transparent membrane slides across each eye underwater, working as a built-in pair of goggles so it can see what it is doing down there. Fact 15. Its lips close behind the front teeth. This means it can gnaw wood underwater without swallowing the river, which is how it does a large part of its work. Fact 16. A beaver can stay under for around 15 minutes. Most dives last a fraction of that, but the capacity is there. Fact 17. That comes from a very large liver and lungs for its body size, a slowed heart rate underwater, and a tolerance for carbon dioxide that would leave you unconscious. 15 minutes is long enough to cross a good-sized pond twice without ever showing a ripple. Fact 18. The fur is the reason people nearly destroyed the species. Under the coarse outer hairs is an underlayer so dense that water never reaches the skin. It runs to tens of thousands of hairs per square centimeter. Your entire head carries about 100,000. Fact 19. A beaver spends a serious part of every day grooming that fur, working oil through it from glands near the tail. Badly groomed fur means a wet beaver, and a wet beaver in a northern winter is a dead one. Fact 20. It has a comb. The second toe on each hindfoot has a split, double claw used specifically for grooming. Fact 21. The hind feet are webbed and large. The front paws are not. They are small, dexterous hands capable of carrying mud, rolling stones, and manipulating sticks with real precision. Fact 22. Now the tail, which does about 5 jobs. It is a rudder while swimming. It is a prop when the animal sits up to gnaw. It stores fat for winter. It dumps body heat in summer through a dense network of blood vessels. And it is an alarm. Fact 23. The alarm is the tail slap. A startled beaver brings the tail down flat on the surface with a crack you can hear across a lake, then dives. Everything in the colony goes underwater at once. Fact 24. Its eyesight is genuinely poor. A beaver relies mostly on hearing, smell, and touch, and it will sometimes fail to notice a person standing still 10 meters away. Fact 25. On land it is almost helpless. Short legs, heavy body, no speed. A wolf catches a beaver in the open without effort. Every single thing a beaver builds exists to avoid being on land. Fact 26. It has castor sacs under the tail, and it uses the contents to mark territory. Beavers build small mud piles at the edges of their range and scent them, so a neighboring family knows exactly where the border is. Fact 27. Beavers can tell relatives from strangers by that scent alone, and they react far more aggressively to a stranger's mark than to a cousin's. Have you ever actually stood next to a beaver dam, not seen a photo, stood on one, or watched one at dusk? Tell me in the comments where, because I want to know how many of you have this animal within reach and never think about it. Now the building.
This is the part that made the beaver famous, and the mechanism behind it is stranger than the reputation. Fact 28. A beaver does not build a dam for the sake of building. It builds to make deep, still water, because deep water is safety. Everything else follows from that. Fact 29. Deep water lets it swim to its front door instead of walking. It hides the lodge entrance. It stops the pond freezing to the bottom in winter, and it floats timber, which is how a small animal moves heavy wood. Fact 30. Beavers in deep, slow rivers often build no dam at all. They simply dig a burrow into the bank. The dam is a solution to a problem, not a compulsion. Fact 31. So here is the trigger I promised you. In the 1960s, the Swedish biologist Lars Wilson raised beaver kits in isolation, with no adults to copy and no dam ever seen. Released into running water, they built proper dams on the first attempt. The skill is not taught. Fact 32.
Then he put them in still water. They did nothing at all. No building, no interest. So he set up a loudspeaker and played the sound of running water. Fact 33. They immediately started piling sticks and mud on the speaker. On a dry concrete floor with no water anywhere, they built over the speaker. Fact 34. And the final version of the experiment is the one I had to read twice. He gave them a real leak, visible through a clear pipe, draining their pond in silence, and played the running water sound somewhere else. The beavers buried the speaker and ignored the leak they could see. Fact 35. The whole animal runs on one rule: hear water moving, cover the sound. It is not clever. It is a simple instruction, applied relentlessly, and it produces the largest structures any animal builds. I want to describe what one of these actually feels like, because photographs undersell it.
The first time I walked out onto a beaver dam, I expected it to give, the way a pile of branches gives. It did not move at all. It was a solid wall with grass growing on top, and the water on the upstream side was a meter higher than the water on the downstream side. And the only thing holding that back was sticks and mud packed by an animal the size of a spaniel. You do not really believe it until you are standing on it. Fact 36. Dams are woven, not stacked. Beavers push branch butts into the stream bed, lay material across the current, and pack the upstream face with mud and vegetation until it seals. Fact 37. A typical dam in Canada runs 10 to 100 meters. Anything over 500 is rare. The record holder in Wood Buffalo National Park is 850 meters and appears on satellite images going back to 1990. Fact 38. Nobody visited it for years.
The park is larger than Switzerland. The dam sits in trackless bog, and helicopters could not find anywhere safe to land. Fact 39. Dams outlive the beavers that build them. Colonies maintain the same structure across generations, and some have been repaired continuously for over a century. Fact 40. Beavers repair a breached dam within a night. Break one at dusk, and the sound of the leak will have it patched before morning, which is why every attempt to solve a beaver problem with a shovel fails on the first try. Fact 41. The lodge is a separate structure. It is a mound of sticks and mud, with a chamber hollowed out inside it, sitting above the waterline. Fact 42. Every entrance is underwater. A predator has to dive to find the door, which rules out most of them. Fact 43. Inside, there are usually two levels: a lower shelf where a wet beaver climbs out and drips, and a higher dry chamber where the family sleeps.
Fact 44. The walls freeze. Beavers plaster the outside with mud in autumn, and once it freezes solid, the lodge becomes something close to concrete. A bear cannot get in. Fact 45. They leave a vent at the top. The mud is deliberately left loose there, so air moves through while the rest stays sealed. A comparison, before the next one. A large lodge can hold a ton of material. That is a heap of sticks and mud about the size of a small car, assembled branch by branch, in the dark, by 4 to 8 animals working with no plan written down anywhere. Fact 46. For winter they build a larder. The family jams branches into the mud on the pond floor near the lodge, under the ice, and eats from it all winter without ever surfacing. Fact 47. They also dig canals. When the good timber is too far from water, beavers excavate channels inland, sometimes over 100 meters, and float the wood back rather than drag it. Fact 48. That is a genuinely unusual thing to do. The animal is not adapting itself to the landscape. It is rebuilding the landscape to suit the animal. Fact 49. Beavers do not eat wood. They eat the soft cambium layer just under the bark, plus leaves, roots, and water plants in summer. The stripped sticks go into construction. Fact 50. Their preferred trees are aspen, willow, poplar, and birch. Given a choice, a beaver will walk past a conifer. Fact 51. They practice a kind of farming without meaning to. Cutting willow and aspen makes them resprout thicker, so a colony that stays put is regenerating its own food supply. Now the family, which is far less like a rodent's and much more like ours than anyone expects. Fact 52. Beavers pair for life. Genuinely, not loosely. A colony is one adult pair and their offspring, and pairs stay together until one of them dies. Fact 53.
A colony is usually 4 to 8 animals, the parents, this year's kits, and last year's young still living at home. Fact 54. Those yearlings work. They help maintain the dam, haul material, and look after their younger siblings. It is one of the clearer cases of cooperative breeding in a rodent. Fact 55. Kits are born able to swim almost immediately, though they are so buoyant at first, they struggle to dive at all. Fact 56. Mothers have been seen carrying kits by hand, walking upright on their hind legs, holding the baby against the chest. Fact 57. At about 2 years old, the young are pushed out to find their own stretch of river. Some travel just a few kilometers, some travel over 100. Fact 58. That dispersal is the most dangerous period in a beaver's life. It is on land, alone, in unfamiliar country, and it is slow. Most beavers found dead by roads are 2-year-olds looking for somewhere to start. Fact 59. Beavers are noisy at close range. They whine, mutter, hum, and grumble at each other constantly inside the lodge. Kits produce a near-continuous complaining sound that owners of captive beavers describe as unmistakably childlike. Fact 60. They choose mates that are genetically different from themselves, detectable by scent. That preference is part of how the European population survived being reduced to almost nothing. Fact 61. On that point, some European populations were rebuilt from as few as 3 animals, and they carried enough diversity through the bottleneck to recover. So here is the second question, and be honest about it. Would you actually want a beaver colony on your land? They flood things, they drop your trees, they also fix your water. Yes or no in the comments, and say which way you lean and why. Now what a colony does to a landscape, because this is the part that turned the beaver from a nuisance into a policy instrument. Fact 62. One dam turns a stream into a pond, a wetland, and a wet meadow all at once. A single family can reshape a valley floor in a couple of seasons. Fact 63. Beaver ponds are biodiversity engines. Amphibians, dragonflies, waterfowl, otters, moose, songbirds, and bats all show up in higher numbers where beavers are working. Frogs in particular depend on them. Still, warm, fish-poor water is exactly what tadpoles need, and it is exactly what a stream does not provide. Fact 64. The dead standing trees a flooded pond creates are their own habitat. Woodpeckers move in, then owls and ducks move into the woodpecker holes. Fact 65. Beaver ponds hold water in the ground. The pond raises the local water table. Water spreads sideways into the soil, and the whole valley floor becomes a sponge. Fact 66. That sponge works during droughts. Beaver-dammed stretches stay green when the surrounding land browns off, because the water was banked in the ground months earlier.
A dam does not just hold a pond. It pushes water sideways into the whole valley floor, and that is where the reserve actually sits. Fact 67. It also works during fire. A 2020 study by Emily Fairfax and Andrew Whittle looked at 5 large wildfires across the western United States using satellite vegetation data. Riparian corridors without beavers lost about 3 times as much greenness during the fire as corridors with them. Fact 68. Those green strips are refuges. Animals that physically cannot outrun a wildfire, frogs, fish, small mammals, survive in beaver wetlands while the surrounding hillside burns. Fact 69. Beaver ponds clean water. Slack water drops its sediment, and the pond floor becomes a chemical reactor where bacteria strip nitrates out of agricultural runoff. Fact 70. They also trap carbon. Sediment and organic material pile up behind a dam for decades, and beaver meadows hold substantial stores of it.
Some of those sediment layers are hundreds of years deep, and geologists read them like tree rings to reconstruct what a valley used to be. Fact 71. There is a long argument about beavers and salmon, and the evidence has largely landed on the beavers' side. Their ponds are prime nursery habitat for young coho and steelhead. Deep, cool, slow, full of cover, and juvenile fish get over and through the dams far more easily than people assumed. Fact 72. Dams eventually fail. When they do, the pond drains and leaves behind a flat, fertile, sediment-filled clearing called a beaver meadow. Much of the good bottomland farmed in North America and Europe was made this way. Fact 73. Which means the landscape most of us think of as natural is post-beaver. Before the fur trade, an enormous amount of the northern hemisphere was a chain of ponds and wetlands maintained by rodents. Fact 74.
Estimates of North America's beaver population before European contact run from around 55 million to 400 million. The uncertainty is huge, and it is worth being honest that nobody can pin it down. But take even the low figure. 55 million animals, each family maintaining ponds, is millions of dams holding water across a continent. Every version of that number describes a landscape far wetter than the one on today's map.
Fact 75. By 1900, that had been cut to somewhere near 100,000 animals. That number rearranged something in my head. I had always filed the drying out of river valleys under agriculture. Plowing, drainage, irrigation, all of it modern. A great deal of it happened centuries earlier than that, and it happened because of hats. Fact 76. Beaver underfur is covered in microscopic barbs. Mat it together and it makes the finest felt anyone had ever produced, and felt made the best hats in Europe for roughly 300 years. Fact 77. That is the entire reason. Not meat, not sport. A fashion in headwear emptied 2 continents of an animal. For roughly 3 centuries, a gentleman's hat was the end product of a wetland being switched off. Fact 78. The Hudson's Bay Company was founded in 1670 to run that trade, and it used the pelt as money.
Prices across a huge part of North America were quoted in a unit called the made beaver, 1 prime winter skin. Fact 79. A great deal of the European exploration of interior North America was beaver-driven. Trappers went first, mapping rivers because that is where the animal was, and the trading posts they left behind became cities. Fact 80. Canada put it on the first stamp it ever issued, in 1851, 16 years before the country existed. It is still on the nickel, and it is still the national symbol, an unusual choice, and a more honest one than most countries make. Fact 81. In Europe, the collapse was even more complete. By around 1900, the Eurasian beaver was down to roughly 1,200 animals in 8 isolated pockets: the Rhone, the Elbe, part of Norway, the Dnieper, a river on the Mongolian border, and a few refuges in Russia. Fact 82. Those pockets were separated by thousands of kilometers.
Every Eurasian beaver alive today descends from them. Fact 83. Now the ice cream. Castoreum is the contents of those scent sacs, and it genuinely does smell and taste of vanilla, with notes of raspberry and leather. It was used as a food flavoring for about a century and is still classed as safe by the American regulator. Fact 84. The internet version of this is wildly overstated. The United States gets through under 300 pounds of castoreum a year, against millions of pounds of vanilla and vanillin. Harvesting it requires killing or anesthetizing a beaver, which makes it absurdly expensive. You have almost certainly never eaten any. Fact 85. There is a reason it works pharmacologically too. Beavers eat willow. Willow bark contains salicylic acid, the ancestor of aspirin, and it concentrates in the castor sacs. Roman and medieval physicians prescribed castoreum for headache, and they were, by accident, correct. Fact 86. The fish story is real, but not in the form it usually gets told. Beaver was accepted as permissible food during Lent in parts of Catholic North America, on the reasoning that it lived in water and had a scaly tail. The version involving a formal papal decree is not well supported. Fact 87. It was not the only case. Church authorities allowed the capybara the same treatment in South America, and there was a similar argument over puffins in France. Fact 88. Now the parachutes, properly. After the Second World War, people moved into the Idaho Lake country, and beavers immediately became a nuisance. Rather than kill them, Fish and Game decided to move them into remote backcountry. Fact 89. Moving them overland was the problem. As the official Elmo Heder wrote afterwards, horses and mules become spooky and quarrelsome when loaded with a struggling, odorous pair of live beavers. Fact 90. So Heder designed a hinged wooden box that would spring open on landing, attached surplus wartime parachutes, and tested the system on an elderly male beaver named Geronimo. Fact 91. Geronimo was dropped over and over. Heder's own report records that the animal became entirely resigned to it, and after each landing would climb back into the box and wait to be picked up and taken aloft again. Fact 92. In autumn 1948, 76 beavers were parachuted into the Chamberlain Basin. 75 survived. Within a year, they had built dams and started families, in country that is now part of the largest roadless protected wilderness in the lower 48 states. Fact 93. Heder wrote the whole thing up soberly for the Journal of Wildlife Management in 1950, arguing correctly that it was cheaper and killed fewer animals than mules. The film of the operation was then lost for decades and turned up in the Idaho State Archives in 2014. It is exactly as strange as it sounds. Fact 94. The recovery since then is one of the largest in conservation history. The Eurasian beaver has gone from about 1,200 animals to at least 1.5 million. Fact 95. Britain took the longest. Beavers were extinct there for around 400 years. After trials in Scotland and Devon, they became a legally protected species in England in 2022, and licensed wild releases have followed. Fact 96. The reason governments change their minds is floodwater. Beaver dams hold back the peak of a storm and release it slowly, so the surge that arrives downstream is smaller and later. That is precisely what an expensive concrete flood scheme is built to do, except that this version repairs itself, builds more of itself, and costs nothing. Fact 97. Restoration crews now build fake beaver dams on purpose. They are called beaver dam analogs, posts driven into a stream bed and woven with branches, and they are used both to repair streams directly and to make a site attractive enough that real beavers move in and take over the maintenance. Now, the practical part, because a lot of people watching this have beavers flooding something they own. Fact 98. Ripping out a dam does not work. It will be rebuilt overnight, and the sudden release of the pond can do more damage downstream than the dam ever did. Fact 99. What works is the sound trigger turned back on them. A flow device is a pipe run through the dam with its intake placed well upstream in deep, quiet water. The pond drains steadily. The beaver hears nothing at the dam, and it leaves the pipe alone. The colony stays, the flooding stops. Trees can be protected the same cheap way, with wire mesh or a coat of sand-loaded paint around the trunk. Fact 100. Not every reintroduction is a good idea. In 1946, 20 pairs were flown from Canada to Tierra del Fuego to start a fur industry. The industry failed. The beavers did not. There are now well over 100,000 across the archipelago, and they have reached the South American mainland, where they are a catastrophe, for one specific reason. The southern beech forests there did not evolve alongside beavers and do not resprout after flooding.
In North America, a beaver pond regenerates the trees around it. In Patagonia, the forest simply dies and stays dead, and the two governments now run a joint eradication program against an animal they imported themselves. Which is the question I want from you. Same species, hero in one hemisphere and disaster in the other. Entirely because of where we put it. Do you think eradicating 100,000 animals is the right call there? Tell me below, because I do not find that one easy. So, after all of that, what is a beaver? It is an animal that solved a single problem.
It is slow, short-sighted, defenseless on land, and it lives in country full of wolves. Its answer was to stop living on land, dig out the water, dam the stream, put the front door underwater, and never be caught in the open again. Every famous thing about it falls out of that one decision. The dam is a moat. The lodge is a keep. The underwater larder is a siege supply. The canals are a supply road. The teeth are the tool the whole project runs on. And the mechanism steering all of it is not intelligence. It is a single rule about a sound, applied without exception for millions of years. The consequences were never part of the plan. The wetland, the water table, the fish nurseries, the fire refuges, the nitrogen stripped out of farm runoff, the meadows that later became somebody's fields. None of that is anything a beaver is trying to achieve. It is the side effect of a rodent making itself hard to eat. We removed that animal from most of the northern hemisphere in the space of a few centuries, for hats. And we drained a continent's worth of wetland doing it without ever deciding to. Now, with rivers running dry in summer and flooding in winter, several governments have concluded that the cheapest available water engineer is the one their ancestors skinned. That is the honest shape of the story. Not a lesson, just an accounting. The animal was doing free work of enormous value, entirely by accident, and we did not notice it until we had taken it away and then had to build the replacements ourselves out of concrete. Last question, and give me something specific. Which animal where you live is quietly holding a system together with nobody thanking it for the work? Name it and tell me what it actually does. And if you want more animals taken seriously, with the papers named and the awkward parts left in, subscribe. The next one lives closer to you than you would like.